So there's a big argument going on about how women should or should not be in ministry. In the early days of the Church of God, they were very big believers that women should be in ministry. At camp meetings, they would do this thing where they would just say, whoever has the message better be the first on stage to share it. So one woman heard God tell her, you have the message today. And she was like, okay, God, but there's no way I'm going to outrun these men. So if I really have it, make something happen where I can. So she does, and she gets on stage, and she is the first one there, and she gets to share what she believes is the message that God had for her. Afterward, a couple men come up to her and tell her, I thought I had the message today, but God really showed me that I didn't, and it was really you. So why is there a need for reconciliation as far as women in ministry is concerned? Well, for one, it causes a division within the church. See, as people and followers of Christ, we should be looking for reconciliation. We should be finding a common ground to grow on, which is Christ. But because we believe that women can't be in ministry, or some people believe that they can and others don't, it causes division, and it causes us to be different and separate. It also causes one gender to be more esteemed than others, and whether or not we realize it, we fall into this category. When we say that only men can be pastors, we degrade what God could do through the women that he has in the congregation. And it's also a big problem when some people that know that they have been called to ministry, women like me, have known that God has called them into ministry. There are people all around us telling us that we can't go into ministry because we are female. And that causes us to question and to almost step down from the call that God has placed on our lives. And that's really not okay. So how can we reconcile? How can we come to an agreement that women can and should be in ministry? Well, number one, we can look at the context of verses and see that the argument for women against ministry is often taken out of context. For example, 1 Timothy 2:11 says that women should practice silence in the church and ask questions at home. But in those days, we don't realize that the women and men in church sat separately. Women were not allowed to be educated back in those days. And so when they had a question during service, they would yell over at their husbands and ask them in the middle of the sermon what something meant. And it was very disrespectful and confusing and distracting. And so Paul wrote that to tell them, no, you need to be quiet and you need to ask questions at home. So when we look at that in context, we see that it doesn't necessarily mean that women should never pastor, they should never preach. It just means that they shouldn't be distracting and disruptive. Also, we believe that God is able to use all people in all settings. And he says this in multiple times in scriptures. In Joel 2:29, it says that in those days, he will use both men and women alike to prophesy. So when we look at scripture, we can see that often it is supportive of women as pastors. And if the entire church agreed on this topic, it would be one less thing standing in the way of God's work. And we can easily look to scripture and find the answer. And when we come to an agreement, it takes away a barrier and makes room for God to work. There would be more pastors and less work for the already overloaded ones. I grew up in a pastor's family, and my dad was constantly overloaded with work. Imagine what would happen if we would allow women to step into some of the leadership roles and take some of the weight off of some of the other already overloaded pastors. There would be more community within the church and less distraction, and it would cause more communion. It would cause more community, and that's what following Christ is all about. It's about community. And less arguments means more of a united front. And a united front is often more reliable when going with people. So action to solve this is not hard. All you have to do is when a woman tells you that she wants to go into ministry, encourage her. Tell her if that's what God is calling you to, follow it. Don't hold back. Be willing and open to what God may have to say through this woman. Sometimes we have a little gender bias where we're like, I don't want to listen if it's not from a man, or I don't want to listen if it's not from a woman, or I don't want to listen if it's not from someone I trust. So be open and willing to listen, and maybe God has something to say through a woman. And lastly, just encourage people around you to maybe question their views when it comes to women in ministry. Ask them to really think about why they're against it and see if maybe it's just something that they were taught growing up and a view that they might need to change.